Welcome to Hard Beautiful Journey, where we embrace vulnerability as our superpower and let courage light our path. I'm Tiff Carson, here to share heartfelt stories of healing, grief, and resilience. Each week, I'll talk with guests from experts to everyday heroes about their journeys through adversity. Together, we'll uncover the beauty that emerges from life's challenges and how each experience can spark profound growth. Join us on this courageous journey of connection and transformation. What's the one truth you've never told out loud? Maybe it's something you've buried for years. Maybe it's something you whispered only once in the dark. Or maybe you're still holding it in your chest, waiting for the right moment or the right person to hear it. Today, I want you to hold that truth gently because my guest, Kath Essing, knows what it's like to carry something so heavy and so painful and still find the courage to say it out loud. Kath's story is tragically common. She's one of the 1 in 3 girls who was sexually abused by someone that she knew and trusted. But what's uncommon is what she's done with that pain. She didn't just survive. She found her voice, and now she uses it to help other women speak their truths and navigate a world that often fails survivors. This isn't just an interview, it's an invitation to listen differently, to support differently, and maybe to finally tell the truth that you've been carrying. So let's begin. Welcome to the podcast, Kath. How are you?
Great. Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Tiff.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Your story and your mission are so incredibly powerful and deeply personal. But beyond the bio and the book title, who are you today? And what would you say you're most passionate about when it comes to using your voice now?
Well, I think what I'm so passionate about is helping create space between our inner dialogue and the way in which we express ourselves to the world around us. For a long time, I had an internal voice that told me to look after the needs of others. And so I curated my story, not because I was afraid to tell it, but I was afraid of how it would impact other people. And I think that I'm not alone in that a lot of women particularly are brought up to look after those around them. And so I just held on to the scary parts of my story, thinking that that was the right thing to do. And now I understand that really that was building a wall between myself and others. And the truth became the bridge. And so now there is nothing dividing us, and I feel more connected to myself and others more than I ever have.
That is so powerful. And you've said that your story is just statistically average. And that honestly is just heartbreaking in and of itself. When did you start remembering? And what was the tipping point that moved you from keeping quiet to actually starting to speak about it?
My body, for a lot of adult survivors of childhood trauma, we disassociate. It's, too sense of what's actually happening. We don't have the language. Our nervous system responds in a way that is about keeping us safe and alive. So I didn't remember my memories until I was in my 20s. And I feel my body remembered first. So depression it was like a black cloud arriving. There was a disconnect between my feelings and my reality. And I just couldn't quite make sense of what I was feeling. And so once I started working with a psychologist to try and make sense of that depression, that's when the beginning of the story started to unravel. So look, initially I had no choice but to tell people because my body started twitching in this session with a psychologist and I couldn't make it stop. It was like the memories had been trapped in my body for almost 20 years and I couldn't contain them anymore. So it was really like my nervous system just unraveled entirely.
Mm.
And so I was very open about the fact that I'd experienced abuse, But I didn't really share details. I just shared that the fact that that was something that I remembered. And then it took another 10 years to make sense of events that happened after the first one. And then it took another 15 years to go to police about that.
Mhm.
And it has so, in the last few years writing the book and talking about it publicly, that I realized how little I'd shared with even the people closest to me. And, we use language as a bit of a bridge, but as I said, it can also be armor. And in my case, I use the word abuse a lot, and it's taken till recently before I actually use the word rape. And, there's a lot of power behind that word, and it was something that felt really uncomfortable saying, but it had to be said because that's what it was.
Mm.
And again, I'm not alone in how we use language to protect ourselves and others, but really it does divide us.
Mhm. So many survivors, they fear not being believed. Was that the case for you?
No, I didn't. I think I was trying to make sense of how can it possibly be true? Like,
Mm.
how could something so awful actually happen? So it wasn't that I didn't think other people would believe me. I think I just had a hard time believing it myself. It's really complicated because 90% of the time we know our perpetrator. And I think that's what makes it so complex in sharing that with other people that we love because it'll be someone known to them as well. And as in my case, I was related to my perpetrator. 50% of the time we are. And so that's where it gets really, really messy. And and that's where I share the statistic of 1 in 3 girls, but really the ripple effect of how this has impacted my life on my friends and family, there's so many more victims of these incidents than just me.
Mhm. So, was it you said that you started to have a depression in it was your early 20s. Were there any memories whatsoever of this happening up like, before you started seeing a psychologist? Or was it completely blocked?
There was definitely emotion and fear of this person that I couldn't make sense of, that there was a little bit of irrational kind of fear around someone breaking into my room or feeling unsafe. But also, I didn't know that it was irrational because it was all I'd ever known. There was
Mm,
this protection, and I think that's the complex part about being a woman in our society and bringing up girls in our society is we're taught to be fearful and we're taught to be worried. And so when I felt that way, no one really questioned it. And I look back now and think that maybe someone should have. But I was also very happy and very gregarious and very liked. So there wasn't a lot of evidence that anything was wrong. And so that's what's pretty scary as a parent actually is like how do we see the signs? And I don't know that beyond my fear that there really were any.
mhm. That was gonna be my question 'cause I have 3 of my own kids and just that worry, right? And, like, what are the signs? But from what you're saying, they vary from person to person and situation to situation, is that correct?
I would say so, absolutely. And the more research that I've done, the more I understand that for me, what it showed up as is people pleasing, that
Mhm,
I played the good girl. And I was the kid everyone could rely on. I was the oldest daughter and the oldest granddaughter. So I was trusted and I lived up to that expectation, and I guess I was hiding behind this shield of, "I've gotta be enough," because there was a little part of me that felt like I wasn't, that I was carrying a deep secret and a blanket of shame, and I just was doing everything I could not to get swallowed up by that. And, I think I made some really smart decisions unconsciously. I was an athlete as a teenager, and so I think I made some really powerful decisions about how to reclaim my strength and power in a constructive way. And I felt strong in my body, and that made me feel safer. And I used my body as an opportunity to be, I don't know, like in control as opposed to out of control. And, that decision that can vary for people. As a parent myself, I've realized that it's just so important for my children to know my story, not to scare them, but so that they can make sense of me and so that they understand that hard things can happen and we
Mhm.
can still come to strength and grace. And really, there's already been a couple of things that my children have come to me about where they've felt worried. And I feel so grateful that they know they can. And
Mhm.
that's been the communication I've had with my kids from a very young age is that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to trust that little bit of wobbly butterflies in your belly that tells you something's not right. And we have sometimes kids come and have a sleepover and they change their mind. They want to go home. And I make sure my kids know that's absolutely okay. Because if we're not giving kids permission to change their minds when it's safe, then how will they ever step up and say, I need help when it's not?
Mm. I love that so much, and that gives them their power too, right? Like, it just allows them to feel that safety even more when they come back to your house another time. So I love that.
Absolutely. And it's the beginning of how we teach children consent. And, when we're talking about childhood abuse, obviously there is no consent involved. It's a power play of an adult and a child. And in my case, they were three very quick, violent acts that I didn't have a chance to stop. But I also was never given a chance to talk about the fact that I was sad. And so that's, I guess that haunts me as a parent is like, what am I missing? And will I ever miss something that's really important to recognize? And I think that's all we can do is tell our children that it's okay, that we're a safe place for them to discuss anything that's happened or that they fear is going to happen,
Mhm.
and for learn to trust their instincts and have autonomy on making those decisions. That's really, really the greatest gift we can give them.
I I agree 1,000,000%, and even being able to show them our vulnerability around these things in, you know, age appropriate language for where they're at that time, but really showing them that you're going through things too, and it just gives them that freedom, I guess, to come to you later about hard things that they are experiencing. So, yeah, I love that you're doing that with your kids too. So, when you started to share openly about this, how did how were their reactions, and how did it impact your healing journey?
Look, I think Tiff, everyone's journey is so different, and that there were things about mine that made it easier than a lot of friends that know have gone through similar things. Firstly, my parents weren't together when I remembered my abuse, and the abuser was in my dad's family.
Mhm.
And so I had already estranged from that family. So that made it easier. Like I've had clients and I've had people since my book's been out disclose with me that their abuser is still someone very much involved in their family life. And that's what makes this whole issue so complex.
Mhm.
So I feel fortunate that there was a safe place for me to talk about this. My whole mum's side of the family, like everybody, there was no taking sides. It was just my truth. And so I was very lucky. It was still complicated because then people who love you still have to go through their own understanding of what this means for them.
Mhm.
My parents who make sense of it and work through their own sadness about not having known and protecting me. And, there's not one part of me that blames anybody else in except for the perpetrator themselves. But it did take a long time to shift through the pain of how did no one notice and why didn't I say something earlier and how did he keep me quiet? And it took years and years of therapy and all sorts of different modalities to really make sense of it all. And my inner child needed a lot of nurturing. And I think ultimately that's what healed me in the end, was giving my own inner child that autonomy to speak up and to be heard.
Mhm. So you have openly shared that your attempt at justice failed. What was that process like for you emotionally and spiritually? And what would you say to someone who may have tried as well and feels betrayed by the legal system?
I hadn't been able to find any public story about a failed attempt at justice. And that is part of the reason why I'm talking about it, because when I first went to police, the police said to me that they believe only 23% of sexual abuse survivors come forward to police. And from that, only 10% of those cases will end up in a trial situation. And from those trials, only 1% will ever eventuate to a prosecution. So I knew from the beginning that it was really very unlikely that the outcome would be my perpetrator would be held accountable. So I was very conscious that the process was the healing part for me, that I wanted to use the opportunity to confront my abuser. I wanted to use the opportunity to tell my whole entire story through working with detectives. It was like I was handing it over. And I use the analogy in my book that it was like a whole big puzzle on the floor that I had to put piece to piece back together. And even though I knew in the end that maybe there was still some missing pieces, I knew I wasn't finishing that puzzle alone. And I carried those pieces with me in such a fragmented way for so long that it was time to just share the load. And that's what the investigation gave me. It also gave me an opportunity to, as I said, to call my abuser and confront him. And that was incredibly grueling and powerful and heartbreaking and liberating all at once.
Mhm.
I came home from COVID, and I don't know about where you are, but we had some pretty strict COVID restrictions in around this time. And so I went to the detectives and office, and I made this call, and then I came home and my kids were home being homeschooled and my husband was home. And I don't remember much about the 4 days that followed, but I didn't leave my bed. And it was almost like I'd ripped open a wound, and all of the pus and all the disease had to come, and it was like this accelerated way of letting it all go. And then I woke up and went, okay, I'm done. And it just, I could not have got where I am today, I don't think, without having walked through those parts of my journey. And that was really the last piece for me, was the reclaiming and the speaking of my journey. And so I don't suggest it's what everybody needs or how everybody will heal. But for me, it was absolutely imperative.
Mhm. Is that when you started writing your book? Was after this process happened?
I Before I wrote the book, I actually put a speech together, so an 18-minute talk that I present to organizations. And once I constructed how to tell that story of remembering, recovering, and reporting, and what benefit there was to my story for the audience, then I thought, this is a book. And so I'd always use writing as a tool for healing. I've always journaled. I write a lot of poetry. When I first went to police and told and gave my statement, which took 4 hours, I got back to my car and there was a message from my mum and my sister, just a text message saying, I'm thinking of you and call me when it's over. And I sat in the car and this poem just poured through me to make sense of how I was feeling. And so that was my response to that moment. And for me, so much of the time, words were constructed in a creative way. So I guess the book was being formulated for 20 years. And then when I finally put pen to paper, it only took a month to write it.
Wow. Oh my, that is incredible. Okay, that's incredible because I've written a
Yeah.
book and mine took 18 months, but there was some other hard stuff that I was going through, and I was trying to give myself the grace of feeling those other hard things that had nothing to do with this book. But once I got through that part, it was like what happened to you. Like the words just came and I knew that it was time to finish this thing. So, was writing your book, was it painful or freeing or both? Or what were the emotions that you were experiencing as you were writing your book?
I was experiencing every emotion that you just mentioned and so many others, but it was almost like trying to catch up to the pouring. It's like someone had turned a tap on so fast that I couldn't get the words out fast enough. Like it was like this pouring of, I've got to capture all of this. And I remember once hearing in Elizabeth Gilbert talk about the fact that, creativity is energy. And when it comes through you, if you don't catch it, then someone else will. And so I
Mhm.
felt like I had the ability to get all these words out. And so they came at odd times of the day and night. And I never quite knew when and how. And so it was freeing at the time. It was confronting handing that first copy of my book to someone I loved. That was scarier than writing it, and
Mhm.
not knowing if it was any good and not knowing if it was going to be received. I've done so much healing that I know that I'm not coming from a place of blame or resentment. I know that in my heart, but you just never quite know with words how they're going to be translated by others. And so I was worried about how my mum would feel about me telling this story publicly. So I gave it to her sister to read first and just said, "Look, I want you to read this as, looking through the lens of your sister and how she might respond." And my auntie was blown away and she just kept saying to me, "This is so beautiful." And I was like, "Really?" And so that was the first step in saying, "Okay, this is okay." And then I handed it on to 4 publishers and they all came back and said, "Yes, we want to publish it." So I knew it was good, but then when I did the audio version and I narrated it out loud, I was so nervous because I thought, what if saying it out loud, what if it doesn't resonate with me? Or what if it's not any good? Or, there were lots of what ifs. And thankfully, I didn't experience that. And I'm very proud of it. And
Mhm.
I'm very grateful at the positive ripple effect it's having on not just survivors of childhood sexual abuse, but their allies who are supporting them and need a resource to help understand what their loved ones are going through.
Mhm. I completely understand what you mean about narrating your own book. Mine is a memoir and I'm a podcaster. So I was leading up to doing that part of the process. I was just, yeah, I got this. No problem. I know how to do it. I know how to speak. I know how to edit. This will take a couple days. Yeah, no. That is not what happened whatsoever. It was it was intense. It was emotional. There was a lot of stops and starts because I was actually saying the words out loud that had just lived in my laptop, and they had gone through my fingers into the laptop, but I hadn't actually said them out loud, and that was a whole different process for me, and but it was another layer of healing as I was saying those words out loud. And after I was done recording it, it was like, okay, I'm done. Like, I have now, like, it felt like I completed a cycle. Is that what you experienced too in the recording piece?
Well, it's interesting you say, 'cause I had done my talk several times publicly, and so because I'd done this investigation, it was like ripping off another layer of skin every time I did it. So by the time I narrated it, I did that again in a day and a half because they said to me it always takes about 3 days. We only like to do 4 hours of recording each day. And I said, no, it's all good. I've got this." And once I started, it was almost harder to stop
Mhm.
because we had a break. I'd had to recalibrate and get back in the zone and back in the flow. So I think the sound engineer very quickly recognized that he was best to just let me go. And then maybe that's, indicative of my personality, and then just get home and fall in a heap. But
Yeah.
that's what I did. But it was, and I found it really tricky listening to it back, like hearing myself. That was a level of healing above the other level of hearing, but hearing the words from my own mouth, knowing other people were listening to it. It was pretty scary, I must say, the first time, and I really struggled and I just said to the publisher, "Do I have to? Like, if there's mistakes, there's mistakes. Do I have to listen to it?" And they said, "Yeah, you really do." So I kept putting that off, and it took a long time, but once I got around to listening to it, that felt like I'd healed something new inside of me.
Mhm. So this book that we're talking about is called The Courage to Speak Your Truth. I want everybody who feels called to read or listen to this book, go and get it. Where can they find it?
It's on Amazon. You can buy a hard copy on there or Kindle version. Also on Spotify and Apple Books. They can listen to me narrate it.
Mhm.
And as I said, I've got my poetry threaded through there. So it's a lovely companion to a walk. Like, I think if you're a survivor, my recommendation is listening to this during the day on a walk, so it doesn't bring up anything in your own story before bedtime. And the same for people that are supporting them. Like, I know myself, I read a lot and I'm quite selective about what I read and what I watch just before bed. So, if you've got a puppy or, you're at a kid's sports game and you just want to walk around and not have to talk to anyone, then it's a nice thing to do
Mhm.
during the day.
So let's talk about those support people that are in your life. A lot of them, your friends and family, said that they didn't know how to help. What did help you? And what do survivors really need from the people who love them?
Well, I think it's a bit like grief, isn't it? That, healing, we can't give a prescriptive answer to what's going to fix the problems that arise in our lives. But one of the consistent things that I learn is that, healing doesn't necessarily come from speaking up, but it absolutely comes from feeling heard. And that will be different for everybody. So, where I tell people to begin is to write out what's happened to them if they're not ready to say the words. And as long as the energy in people is moving, I think at whatever pace suits the individual is important. I think that there were so many people that wanted to fix me, and I've got girlfriends who I've been friends with for 35 years that they did an intervention on me when I was in my 20s because they were so worried. I wasn't getting out of bed. I was just heavy with depression. And one of those girlfriends is still one of my best friends till today, and she's now a trained um, counselor. And she just said, "I just think back to that time, and I'm really sorry." And I said, "Don't be sorry. You thought you were doing the right thing, and you did the best with what you had at the time." But I think, we have much more information now about what it means to be healed and to heal and how to support others, and really begin by listening and just holding space, not just because it's hard to do, but holding space for that individual to tell you what it is that they need.
Mhm.
And me writing helped me establish what that was.
Mhm. And in that holding space, there truly doesn't need to be one word that comes out of your mouth as the person holding space. And I've witnessed that many times. It's just being there
Yeah.
and
And
letting them feel
reminding
it.
people Yeah, and just not putting pressure, like, it's okay. And that's, as a parent too, it's letting your kids know that some days don't feel good. Some days, are hard. Some teachers we don't get along with. Some friendships can be challenging. Like, we have lots of challenges in our life. Like the title of your podcast, it's a hard, beautiful journey. Like, it is. And I think one of the gifts we can give our children is learning that just because one day is hard doesn't mean the day that will follow will feel as challenging. And so I think this whole idea that life is meant to be easy or free from pain, I think that is where the pain comes from.
Mm, absolutely. Like, absolutely, and there was a point in my life where I was just like, "Why is there all of this pain?" Like, it was a "Why me? Why is this all happening to me?" And it was when I stopped feeling like that and like, "What can I do with this pain? What is this pain supposed to teach me?" That's when it started to shift for me and my, like, depression started to lessen, and where I was really trying to understand the gift that was in that hard, because they're
And there's
everywhere.
always there is. And I feel like some of the most beautiful moments in my life have come from transcending some of the most difficult. And even if we look at the metaphor of childbirth, or often I remember a midwife saying to me that, when you hit that point just before your baby's born, where you just think you can't do anything more, you can't push, you want to give up, it's all too much. That's when the birth's about to happen. And so I often think about my healing journey in that way. Like, when I hit a point where it's just too much, I almost celebrate, oh, wow, this means I'm nearly at the end of this phase. I'm nearly at this break, nearly. And, whether that's true, but it doesn't matter because it's a story that serves me and gets me through those hard times. So
Mhm,
I kids, that this is good. When it's really hard, it means something new and exciting is about to be birthed, and
mhm.
it's worth celebrating.
There's times, though, I'm being real, where I've asked God and my angels and my peeps, like, "I need 5 days off. Just give me 5 days off, give me a break, let me catch my breath, and then we'll go again." So, sometimes they give me, what I'm asking for, but I don't know, there's some days where I'm like, "Really? Are you sure?" So, at what point did you realize that your story wasn't just for you and that you could help others with it? And what did stepping into advocacy look like for you?
I think I'm still learning what that looks like, to be honest. But for me, when I was running my business, and I would have so many women come to me who wanted small business advice and mindset advice. And when I realized that of the number of challenges that stemmed back to childhood trauma were so significant, I started getting angry. I started feeling just frustrated that there was just this prevalence that as a society we were just not talking about and accepting. And so the day that I went to the police for the first time was a day I'd taken my children to a justice march locally. So there was a group of people that arrived at the beach, and justice was formed by human bodies. The word justice was formed, and it was videoed by a drone, and that image went all around Australia at the time. And I remember standing there thinking, I'm this is amazing. I'm teaching my son that he needs to speak up and advocate for women, and I'm teaching my daughter that she's got a voice and she could use it. And then in that moment, I realized I actually hadn't done that for myself. And so there was this little cloud of um, a cloud within me that didn't feel that I was quite being authentic to the world. because I knew I was strong, I knew I was outspoken, and I knew that I was making a difference, but I hadn't done this really hard thing.
Mm.
And it wasn't about anyone else, but it was about there were parts of me that really needed it. And my children became my mirror of that for me. And so I dropped them at school and I went straight to the police station that day and walked up to the counter and said, I want to report a sexual assault. And that was the beginning. So it was about really recognizing that I wasn't doing it for any particular outcome. I wasn't doing it for any other person. It was just something I was ready for that I needed to do for me.
Mhm. What would you say to someone who is listening right now who feels like it might be too late to tell the truth or to speak up?
There were so many things I learned, and that was another reason, like, it was 18 months of investigating. It was a very complicated time because it was during COVID, but there were so many things at the end of that investigation that I wish I had have known. And one of those things was I didn't realize that at any point I could have gone to the police and given a statement and just left it with them and taken 10 years off. I didn't realize that at any point in that 18 months I could have said, just, I need to pause it for a while. And I think if I had have known that, then I might have done it a lot sooner.
Mm.
So that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is that it's okay if you don't do anything, if that's what your soul needs. But it's also okay to put your toe in the water and speak to someone and find out what that process looks like. And I think for me, when I found out my abuser was still alive, I realized that I would have regretted never confronting him. But I also have friends who've been through similar things that think that's their idea of, worst case scenario is having to talk to that person again. So really it's about figuring out what your soul needs, what your own story looks like, and not being too swayed by other people's opinions of that.
Mhm.
Because people try and talk me out of going to police, that it felt so, and I did have people say that's very unlikely that this will ever proceed to a trial, but that didn't matter. That wasn't why I was doing it. So just know what the outcome for you individually is. It's never too late. It's never too late to reclaim your voice,
Mhm.
and late to look after your inner child who's been hurt.
Mhm. Something that I've been learning about and I'm doing training right now is in somatic and breathwork. And I'm experiencing it in my own healing right now because we are deep in the embodiment piece of that training. And trauma lives in our body. So, have you ever used tools like breathwork or somatic movement or other body based tools? And how have they helped in your healing journey, if you have?
Absolutely have. And very instinctively, to be honest. Like, I've done a lot of psychotherapy and and I'm a psychotherapist, I'm a trained psychotherapist. So a lot of my training was where some of the most profound healing came from. And within some of that training is where a lot of the letting go physically of the holding of memories happened. And for meditation, for me, has in some ways, breath has taken over some of the meditation that I've done. And there were times where my body would be letting go so much that I saw that I was just levitating off the bed.
Mhm.
And and breath helped move emotion and energy in a way that nothing else could. It's interesting, isn't it? We tend to say to our children, just take a breath, calm down. Like, we just know instinctively what heals us and what frees us. And then as adults, we almost get untrained to
Mhm.
trust in the steps. So I've done a lot of energy work, and I still do. And I don't know quite who I call to, but I feel very guided. I'm sure, surrounded by angels, and I used to talk to fairies, and, like, for me, I just have had this magical world around me that has held me and stopped me from feeling too lonely.
Mhm.
And that's been part of my healing. kind of and sense of happiness, I suppose, as a child, and I've brought that into my adulthood.
Mhm. If you could change one thing culturally, legally, about how we respond to survivors, what would that be?
I think the shame is placed in the wrong hands. That, that the narrative in our society is that the victim has to prove that something happened, and we just make it easier for perpetrators to place the blame and on those victims. And I think the silence is perpetrated by that shame, and it's just so misplaced. And I don't know how to change that conversation, but I believe that when we start to really believe that, particularly in families, the prevalence of abuse that's happening, and I think we have to just make people aware of the statistics so that we can change them and make sure that we understand that the bad behavior and the responsibility sit solely with the person perpetrating these events, not the person who is surviving them.
Mhm. I want everyone to go and look up Kath, get her book. This is where you can find out all about Kath. If you are listening on audio, it's at www.bespeak.au. She is on Instagram at Kath_Essing, and on Facebook.com is Bespeak Consultancy. Um, I end every interview asking my guest what they are grateful for. What are you grateful for today, Kath?
I'm grateful for this conversation with you. Thank you.
Yes.
And I'm grateful that my inner child has been heard so that my adult self can listen to my children completely objectively from where they're coming from, not from where I'm projecting they should be from.
Mm, that's beautiful. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your journey with us. Thank you for sitting in this space and reminding us that we are never alone in our healing. You reminded us today that silence may feel like safety, but it can also be a prison. And that truth, even when it feels dangerous, can be the most powerful medicine that we have. So maybe today is your day to speak something out loud. Maybe just to yourself, or maybe to someone who's earned the right to hear your story. And if you're not quite ready yet, that's okay too. There's no timeline. It's just a gentle invitation to come home to yourself, one breath at a time. If this conversation touched something in you, I'd love to invite you into our private Hard Beautiful Journey Facebook community. It's a safe space for big hearts and tender stories. And you can also download my free Healing Heart meditation at tiffcarson.com. It's a beautiful way to reconnect with your body, your breath, and your truth. Thank you again, Kath, for being here and sharing your story with us. I know that it is going to help so many people that have walked a similar journey as you. So thank you.
Thank you so much for holding this space so beautifully for me to tell it. I'm very grateful.
Thanks for being here for this episode of Hard Beautiful Journey. I hope today's episode inspired you to embrace your own vulnerabilities and recognize the strength within you. Remember, every story of resilience adds to the beauty of our shared journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your support helps me spread hope and healing to even more listeners. Until next time, keep shining your light and embracing the beauty in your journey. Bye-bye.